conversations in this Torah portion is about the spies and the mission of sending the spies to scout out the land of Israel, a mission that spectacularly fails. It fails in a like, if you could create intentionally a disaster, but like amplify it, that's what's going on with the spies. Shelach lecha anashim, God says to Moses, if you want, send these people to check out the land of Israel, and it fails. So let me give you about the background of what happened with the spies, and then we're going to talk about the Makoshesh. It's all going to come together, and at the end of the day, you and I are going to discover the key to a successful attitude in the world that we live in. But all of that will come at the end of today's class. Let me set the stage. We're about a year after the Exodus. The Exodus happens in the year 2448. We are now in the year 2449 as our Torah portion begins. The Jewish people have received the Torah at Sinai. They've even created a golden calf. Now they've built the Mishkan, they built the tabernacle. And at this point, it's time to march straight into the land of Israel. Are you guys hearing background noise? You guys are hearing background noise? Okay, can you ask Riva to just be a little bit quieter? Can you guys play? Give me a second. You guys play in the room and close the door, please. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm back with you. Listen, this is Zoom Life. This is how we roll. Okay, now, 1 year after the Exodus, the Jews are now set to go into the land of Israel. But the Jewish people have a little apprehension. And they say to Moses, we'd feel much more comfortable if you send people into Israel, check it out, and let us know what's happening on the ground. We don't feel so comfortable walking into a dangerous situation, walking into a death trap. We want to know what's going on. We want some recon. We want some information and intelligence on the ground. Moshe goes to God, and God says the following: Shlach lecha anashim. Send for yourself men. If you want, you can send. If not, don't. It's up to you. I'm not telling you what to do. This is up to your own discretion. Moshe sends these people, and it fails. Like I said, it fails big time. I am going to share my screen with you, and let's peruse some verses that speak to this incident. Okay, 1 second. Let's move through. Here we go. Text 1a. Steve, are you up to reading? Text 1a. You got to unmute yourself, and then we can hear you. All right, awesome.
And God spoke to Moses, saying, send men to scout the land of Canaan, that I will give to the children of Israel. Send one man from each tribe. Each will be a leader of his tribe.
Perfect. We have 12 scouts, 12 tribes, 12 people scouting out the land. Fantastic. Let's continue. Steve, please continue. Don't mute yourself yet. Text 1b. Here's the rest of the story. Oh, 1 second. They spent 40 days scouting out the land. They come back with the fruit. Oh, this luxurious, delicious fruit. Huge grapes and wonderful fruit. But they came to a conclusion that there's no way they can conquer the land. As you'll see in a moment, this is why. Take it away.
And the men that ascended with him said, we cannot go up against the people, because they are stronger than us. They spoke ill of the land that they scouted, saying, the land that we passed through to explore is a land that consumes its inhabitants, and the people that we saw therein are men of stature. There we saw the fallen ones, the sons of Anak, descendant of giants. In our eyes we felt like grasshoppers, and so were we in their eyes.
They were completely intimidated. They were out of sorts. They came to a land. They saw fortified cities. They saw strongly armed people. They saw giants, whatever. They saw all of the signs that instilled fear within them. They went back to the people, and they reported back to the people saying, this land is ridiculous, it's crazy, we're going to be destroyed, we have no chance. And the people panicked. And what happens in the aftermath is the people panic, and because of this, God eventually says, you're not going to go into the land. If you're afraid of going into the land of Canaan, and transforming it to the land of Israel, if you're afraid of going against these people and in that land, then I'm not going to force you into it. That's fine. You're not going to go in. Your children will go in. Steve, you got one more, text 1C. 3 more lines. Take it away.
And the children about whom you said they would be as spoils, I will bring them, and they will know the land that you despised, and your corpses will fall in this desert.
This is what God says in the aftermath of the story of the spies. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the story because I think it's a well-known story. I think we've talked about it in previous years. I'm hoping either you know the story or getting enough of the story to make you dangerous. The point is, the spies come back with a negative report about the land of Israel, instills fear within the people. The people cry to God and they cry to Moses, we want to go back to Egypt. So God says, you don't want to go in? Don't go in. But here's what you need to know. Your children, you thought your children, if you go in, your children are going to be taken captives, hostages, as slaves. Those kids that you're worried about, they're going to be the ones that eventually conquer the land. The kids that you're afraid of, that you fear are vulnerable, they're the ones that are going to be the mighty warriors, because all y'all are too afraid. So you are going to be corpses falling in the desert. You're going to pass away in the desert. Your kids, they'll be the ones to take on the challenge and to conquer the land of Israel and settle it. Done. That's the end of the story. So in the within the realm of Jewish history, we call this a tragedy. Why a tragedy? It delays the mission of entering the land of Israel for 40 years. They were supposed to enter the first year after the Exodus. They spent 40 years of wandering in the desert precisely in order that this generation should pass away and the next generation went in. Just so you know how it worked, the people who were to pass away in the desert and not into the land of Israel was anyone between the ages of 20 and 60. So basically, it took 40 years for the 20-year-olds to hit 60. But as soon as they hit 60, that's when they would pass away. So everyone passed away at 60 of that generation. So when the youngest of that generation, the 20-year-olds, under 20 were considered the kids that would go in. But at 20, that cutoff at this point in time, those who were 20, when they turned 60, that's when they would pass away. And that's when the 40 years of wandering ended. And that's when they ultimately went into the land of Israel with Joshua at the helm and the next generation of Jews. Okay, that's the story, a tragedy, 40 years of wandering, etc. Next, the end of the Torah portion, the Torah talks about the Mekoshesh. And this is the one that I talked about at the top of the class. The very not well-known story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim. What does Mekoshesh Eitzim mean? It means gathering wood. A wood gatherer. Yeah, somebody goes into the forest and collects wood. You putting together a bonfire or stoking your fireplace. All right, you need wood. So to get wood, you have to gather wood. The Mekoshesh Eitzim was a guy who was gathering wood. Very strange story, very enigmatic, very peculiar. It's going to raise a ton of questions. But at the end of all this, I'm hoping you walk away with an incredible insight that will change your life. Text number 2. Donna, if you don't mind, please read text 2. This is the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim.
Jews were in the desert. Oops, I gotta unmute myself.
No, I unmuted you. You're good.
Okay. And the Jews were in the desert, and they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath. Those who found him gathering wood brought him before Moses, Aaron, and the entire assembly. They placed him under guard because what should be done to him had not been specified. There
you go. The guy's gathering wood on Shabbos, right, on Shabbat, and they find him gathering wood, and they bring him in front of the tribunal, right? Moses, Aaron, and the entire people, and they put him under lock and key because they didn't know what to do. So they said to Moses, what do we do with this guy? He's gathering wood on Shabbos, on Shabbat. Now, let me explain what's going on here. First of all, the word Mekoshesh means gathering. Mekoshesh Eitzim means gathering wood. So if you want to know who the Mekoshesh was, he was the gatherer. He was the wood gatherer. On Shabbos, on Shabbat. Now, gathering wood on Shabbat would be in violation of the prohibition against working on Shabbat. Gathering involves various things, and you're going to be carrying. There are various things involved with the gathering of the wood on Shabbat, which is not, it should not be done on Shabbat. Now, in ancient times, when there was a temple or a tabernacle, and there was a high court, a Sanhedrin, a Bet Din, back in the day, and when there were witnesses and a very specified protocol, in some cases, the prohibition of Shabbat was actually, or the mitzvah of Shabbat was actually a capital, it was a capital mitzvah, so to speak, or the violation was a capital violation. And so they knew this. They knew that it was a capital crime in those times. And the question was, what was the sentence? What's the punishment? What do you do with this guy, the Makoshish? There he is, in a public setting, right? Or semi-public setting, public enough that people saw him. Public setting, he's been warned. It's in times of Moses and a court and a tabernacle, all those times. Again, it's a very specific setting over there. And he's in violation, a clear and blatant violation of the law. So they brought him to Moses. They brought him to Aaron. What do we do with this guy? And they bring it to God, and God explains what to do, and ultimately they actually put him to death. He was in that context, and they actually administered a capital punishment for this violation. Now, you might think, well, this is gathering wood on Shabbat, that's it. Listen, I explained a bit about the context. The Rebbe once explained it using this analogy, using the analogy of a space shuttle mission. And the Rebbe explained that imagine NASA trains astronauts for 10 years, invests billions of dollars into this space mission, and the astronauts are about to go on their mission, and the astronauts are told, you have to wear this type of clothing, you have to eat this type of food, you have to sleep in this type of bed. Imagine if an astronaut goes onto the shuttle, it's launch day, Cape Canaveral or wherever they go, launch day. Imagine if the astronaut, stepping up to those steps, whips out a Marlboro and lights it up. It's a free country. I can do what I want. All they did was take a match, take a lighter and light a cigarette. What's the problem? What's the problem? What do you mean, what's the problem? The whole space shuttle is in danger. The whole mission is in danger. And it's not only this one craft. We're talking about teams and teams of people. We're talking about billions of dollars of investment, 10 years of training. We're talking about decades of planning. And for a cigarette, one cigarette is going to ruin everything? The answer is, Remember the Challenger? One O-ring. Remember the Challenger? I watched that live. I was a kid then. I watched the Challenger live. Very, very, very traumatic. Very sad. Anyway, listen. One O-ring, does it make a big deal? Yeah, it does. When you're on a mission, when you're in a very specific environment, it absolutely makes a big deal. Gathering wood on Shabbat, does it make a big deal? By now, you should know the answer. Yeah, in a context, of course it makes a big deal. In this context, it absolutely made a big deal. So what happens is they bring him to the Moses and Aaron and the leaders, and God says what he says, and they apply what they apply. Fine, that's the end of the story. Now the question is, what is the connection between? This is toward the end of the Torah portion. This is the story that's told, the story of the Makoshish. The question that we might ask is, what's the connection? We love juxtapositions. We love connections. What's the connection between the story of the spies and the story of the Makoshish? What is the connection between the story of the spies and the story of the wood gatherer? I am so glad that you asked. Because Tosfot, in the Talmud, Tractate Bava Batra, asks exactly this question. And he gives a beautiful explanation of why it is that the Makoshish story is connected to the spy story. They seem to be completely different stories. Spies failing, 40 years of wandering, and a guy who's gathering wood. What's the connection? Makesha, what's the connection between them? Just you wait and see. This is going to be wonderful. Fran, are you up to reading? Hold on. I think I was too quick. Yeah, you got it?
Okay. Yeah. There may be a little background noise since I have a visitor.
Don't worry. Oh, hey. Hey there. Nice.
That's my grandson.
Welcome.
Okay,
very cute. All right, go ahead. This is text number 3. The event of the wood gatherer. Yeah.
The event of the wood gatherer occurred at the beginning of the 40 years, shortly after the event of the spies. The Midrash explains that the wood gatherer had noble intentions. The people had assumed that because they had been barred from entering the land as a result of the event with the spies, they were exempt from the commandments. He therefore arose and transgressed the Sabbath so that he would be executed and the others would observe.
Unbelievable. I didn't see this coming, right? Tosfot, which is one of the great commentaries of the Talmud. Tosfot actually is a collaboration of a bunch of scholars that were all pretty much the grandsons of Rashi, just so you know. But anyway, Tosfot, the Tosafists, give a wild explanation. This is like mind-blowing. They say, what's the connection? This story of the wood gatherer happened right after the story of the spies, and that's why the Torah mentions them back to back. So what's going on? In the aftermath of the story of the spies, we just discussed before, God says, you don't want the land, you're afraid of going into Israel? No problem, knock yourself out. You'll wander for 40 years. You'll pass away at the age of 60, a nice number, 60 years we're giving you, not taking you out right now, we'll give you some time, 60 years old, and then your children are going to go in. So what happens, Tosfot says, what happens is, the people were thinking, look at this line, the people had assumed that because they had been barred from entering the land, therefore they were also exempt from the commandments. They thought, you know what? If we're not going to Israel, if God doesn't want us there, right? If we're wandering anyway, so probably all bets are off. Probably it doesn't matter what we do. Probably we don't really need to observe the commandments because anyway, we're not going into the land for another 40 years. So we have a free pass. You know, like in golf, a mulligan. You know what a mulligan is? When you take a bad shot and you do a do-over, so that one doesn't really count. They were thinking the 40 years is a mulligan. It does not count. It does not matter. God doesn't care about what they do, and whether they do a mitzvah, don't do a mitzvah, it doesn't make a difference. Comes along this guy, the Mekoshesh, the wood gatherer, and you know what he does? Quite literally, takes one for the team. He says, I want to show all y'all that what we do absolutely matters. That what we do is absolutely important. That it's important and imperative that we keep the law and don't violate the law. And to prove it, I'm willing to sacrifice my life. I'm going to go gather wood, and I'm going to violate the Shabbat, and I'm going to be hauled in front of Moses and Aaron and the others, and they're going to ask God, and God's going to say, well, that's what you do. You got to put him to death, and they're going to put him to death, put me to death. This guy's saying, they'll put me to death, and that will demonstrate once and for all that these 40 years are not somehow kind of like a free zone. This is still, we still have expectations here. God still wants us to observe the commandments. Okay, I'm going to check in with you right now because I think it's important that I check in with you and that I see you because I love seeing you guys, number one. And number two, I want to make sure that you're all following me so far. Are you with me in the narrative? Yes? To quickly recap, because you're gonna have to halt cup here a little bit. It's a bit twisty, turvy. Is turvy a thing? Is that the expression?
Topsy-turvy?
Topsy-turvy. Thank you. Something wasn't coming out right there. Topsy-turvy, but it's not so topsy-turvy. There are some twists and turns, and you have to halt cup here because it gets a little bit meta. It's going to be magnificent. So I'm going to quickly recap, and then we're going to go on. We have the story of the spies. We have the aftermath, which is God's decree, 40 years of wandering. Okay? We have the story of the Mekoshesh, put to death for gathering wood. And Tosfot commentary on the Talmud, and Tosfot says, what's the connection between the two stories? And after the spies and after the decree of 4 years of wandering, the people were mistaken. They thought, doesn't matter what we do. It's not, we don't have to do the mitzvot until we go into the land. That's when life really starts, right? It's like lockdown. It doesn't really matter. When we get back, that's when life will resume. That's what they thought, right? It doesn't really matter what happens now. They're sheltering in place for 40 years, so whatever. So the Mekoshesh did not like that. We don't even know his name. We just call him the Mekoshesh by his actions, the gatherer, the wood gatherer. So this guy is like, that's not right. God really cares what we do. And to prove it, I'm going to gather wood in violation and be put, face the ultimate punishment, and that will demonstrate once and for all that that was important. Yes, go ahead. Oh, are you waving or you're asking? Hold on one second. You got to unmute.
Asking.
Go.
Couldn't the Mekoshesh have voiced his intentions to Moses or Aaron, and Moses would have asked God for a ruling?
Yes, excellent. I'm about to ask a bunch of questions. Perfect. Because although Tosfot gives a beautiful explanation, the whole story doesn't make any sense. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. So that's why I wanted to recap before I ask all these questions. Are you kidding me? This makes sense what we just said? Tosfot says with a straight face, yeah, because of the 40 years, he wanted to prove a point, so therefore he did this, and that's why he got executed, and it was all intentional. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. Number one, if you want to tell the people, so first of all, why did the people think they were exempt from the mitzvot because of the 40 years of wandering? Like, where did that come from? Like, even the premise that he was trying to debunk. Oh, the people thought that it was a mulligan. They thought it didn't count, so he had to prove that it counted. Why did they think it didn't count? They weren't told that they're off the hook. They were just told they're not going to go into Israel for 40 years. That doesn't mean that you don't have to keep Shabbat or do any of the other mitzvot that are not dependent on the land. Yeah, there are some mitzvot that you need to live in the land of Israel for, like tithing and leaving the corners of your field for the poor. There's some agriculturally land-based mitzvot that wouldn't kick in for 40 years. Okay, but what about everything else? What about other mitzvot that are not dependent on geography, but on you? Why did they think that it wasn't applicable? Question number one. That wasn't your question yet. That's my question. Question number two. The guy wants to make a point. It matters. God cares. Right? Accountability. Responsibility. Mitzvot observance. You got to do it. That's what his agenda was. Okay. Publish an article. Yeah? Take out an op-ed in the Desert Times. Right? Hold a sign. Make a billboard. Fly a helicopter with one of those, or a plane with one of those banners. Or at the very least, or most, whichever way you look at it, probably the most, at the very most, if he really wanted to make like a spectacle, he should have worn, let's say, a garment with wool and linen. He should have done something that gets a little bit of a punishment, but not the ultimate punishment. What are you, crazy? Who does that? What's this Mekoshesh guy doing? What's this wood gatherer doing? He wants to prove a point, so he goes all the way to that extreme? Are you kidding me? Do something that's a little less severe that also has a consequence, but at least you're not paying the ultimate price. Are you with me on the question? Yeah? 2 questions so far. Question number 1, why did they think it didn't matter what they did? The premise doesn't make sense. Number 2, he was trying to make a point. Why such a radical point? I mean, why such a radical means to make that point? And furthermore, the last question that I want to ask is, it seems weird that through a sin, you're going to teach a lesson. Right? This guy violates the Shabbat. At that point in time, in that context, a capital crime. And you're telling me that from that, it's going to be a pedagogical moment, it's going to be an educational moment? We're going to have a learning moment from a sin? Something doesn't sound right about that whole thing. Something sounds a little off. It sounds a little bit dark, a little bit weird, right? So again, the question is, number 1, why did the people assume that it didn't matter what they did? Why is he making such an extreme point? And how can you even make a point through a sin? it doesn't seem right that you can learn a positive lesson intentionally from a sin. It doesn't make sense. Now, if you think the questions are strong now, just you wait another few minutes, because I am about to ask the question of all questions on this story. And that's going to be the key that opens up the door to seeing this in a whole new light and to accessing very, very relevant personal lessons for all of us. But first, Stephanie has a question. Stephanie, go ahead.
Thank you very much. This story actually makes total sense to me. I don't understand what the conflict is. The Torah is both a living example and a metaphor for life. We learn through our mistakes, right? This guy took a fall so that we could learn, they could learn, we today can learn. I don't understand.
Excellent point. Yes, I agree with you. He took a fall. He literally took a fall, well, or whatever, like literally, figuratively, took a fall in order to teach a lesson, correct. And that was his intention. However, here's the question, and here's the subtlety of the question. Number one, if you wanted to take a fall, couldn't he have taken a little bit of a less severe fall? I mean, couldn't he have taken a fall that wasn't like the ultimate fall that he cannot ever get up from? Let him take a little fall, something that gets you lashes, right? Lashes? Not those lashes. Like, whatever. Stripes lashes. A little bit of a different lashes than the extensions. So, number one, do something else, right? Number one. Number two, it still seems a little bit odd. Yes, we always learn from our mistakes, and yes, when we fall, the goal is to get back up. But here's a guy who intentionally kind of throws himself under the bus, and his thought is that through sinning, he's going to teach a lesson. It just seems like too intentional to work. In other words, it's like we said last week, kind of, it's like sinning with the intention to do tshuva. It's like it doesn't really work that way. You can't like intend to learn a lesson from this. It just seems a little weird. Again, I understand your point, but that's the question. Chazan Ben, go ahead. You got to unmute. We're not good lip readers, not as good as we look.
Okay, there we go. So, what I don't understand, what really doesn't upset me, but it makes me kind of wonder. There are rules about the only time you take your life, right? How do you take your own life to prevent somebody else from sinning?
Oh,
that's what seems so wrong.
Excellent. That's an incredible question as well. Excellent question. What Ben is saying is, we talk about putting your life at risk in certain contexts, right? And it's very limited when you put your life at risk, right? You put your life at risk only for very exclusive things. This guy sacrificed his life. Went Mesiras Nefesh, sacrificed his life for what? To teach a lesson? What kind of lesson? Second of all, you could have taught it a different way. What justification is there to teach it with this way? It's a very strong question, and it dovetails with the questions that I asked. It's all part of this the same idea. So now we are up to the first approach with the answers. And the first approach is to explain why the people thought that they were off the hook, or why it was, it didn't matter what they did because of this 40 years of wandering. Once again, I will share my screen with you. Once again, I will call on someone to read. Here we go. This is from the Sifri. You're going to have to, take a look at this. And let's jump in. Who did not read yet? Oh, David, you're on the top of my screen. Go ahead and jump right in. Although
I shall exile you from Israel, be diligent with the mitzvot, that when you return, they will not seem new to you. This is analogous to a king who grew angry with his wife and should return to her ancestral home. The king asked, please wear your royal ornaments while in your father's home, so that when you return to the palace, they will not seem new to you. Similarly, God told the Jews, "My children, be diligent with my commandments, so that when you return, they will not feel new to you."
Now, by the way, this is not talking about the 40 years of wandering. This is talking about, the prophecy that later on the Jews will be exiled from the land of Israel. And it's saying that even though we're exiled, we should still keep up what we need to keep up, etc. And the analogy is the king who sends his wife home to her family for a little bit. I'm not advocating any of this. I'm just reading what it says over here, right? We're just reading what the Sifri says. And what happens is that he tells her, although you're not in the palace, and although you don't need to wear your royal ornaments, wear them anyway, because it's going to keep you in that familiar place, so that you don't lose that momentum. So now we have a little bit of an understanding on what the Jews were thinking, facing this 40-year sentence of exile and wandering. They basically thought that they were being rejected by God, right? They thought, and on some level they were. They thought they were being, not that they were in Israel at that point to be sent out, but they thought that being held back from entering Israel is pretty much the same as being banished, as being sent away. And at that point, they were being stripped of their special, of their special relationship. They thought they were being punished, which they were to a certain extent, but they thought that punishment meant that God did not find favor with them, and therefore maybe it would be a chutzpah to wear those clothes or to do those mitzvot, so to speak. So they felt, you know what? We're not going to do it, or we don't need to do it, or God doesn't want us to do it, or whatever. So that answers the first question. First question was, why did they think that they were off the hook from the mitzvot, that the Makoshish had to teach them that lesson? The answer is because they thought they were being rejected by God, and rejected by God they thought meant that was it. They were, what are they going to do now? Keep on wearing those garments? They've been stripped of the garments. They've been banished, so to speak. So that's what they thought. Now that question is out of the way, now we can look at something that is phenomenal. This is not necessarily related to what I just said, but it's very, very important when it comes to the laws of Shabbat and to our discussion about the Makoshish. Now I want to take a half a step back, and talk about the laws of Shabbat with you. Because there's something unique when it comes to the laws of Shabbat that really aren't present in many other scenarios. And that is the following. When it comes to the laws of Shabbat, there's something called meleches machsheves, or melechet machshevet, which means the melacha, the work, in order to be considered a work that's in violation of Shabbat, it has to be intentional. There has to be an intentionality. There has to be a purpose and a mindfulness in the work that is intended for that purpose. And I'll explain what I mean. Classic example. If you have in mind that you want to, and this is the example that Maimonides gives. You know what? Let's read it. I'm going to read this one because I'm already on a roll here with this concept. So let me share this with you. Text number 5, Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, Laws of Shabbat, Chapter 1, Halacha 8. Here we go. Pay attention here for a second. If a person intended to pick black dates, right, from the tree or wherever they grow, but picked white dates instead, or to pick dates first and then to pick grapes, but mistakenly reverse the order and pick the grapes ahead of the dates, that person is not liable for the violation. Now, let me explain. Picking fruit on Shabbat would be a violation because you're disconnecting it from its life and for other reasons. But here's the point. If you intended to pick one and you pick the other, or to pick one before the other and reverse the order, you are not liable for that violation. Look at that line. That person is not liable. Why? Maimonides explains. Although he picked what he intended to pick, in that latter case at least, it is considered a non-deliberate action. That's the key word, non-deliberate action, since he did not pick it in the order that it was intended. So that he's referring to the second case. If you wanted to pick both dates and grapes. But you intended to do it in that order. But in actuality, you reversed it. First the grapes, and then the dates. So you got, at the end of the day, you got what you wanted. Nonetheless, halacha says, Jewish law says, you're not chayiv, you're not liable. Why? Because, look at this last line, the Torah only prohibited deliberate action. The Torah only prohibited deliberate action on Shabbat. It's called in the Hebrew, melechet, machshevet. This means intentional, deliberate malacha, work or action. If it wasn't deliberate, if it wasn't intentional, then it's not biblically prohibited. The rabbi still said it's not good, you still shouldn't do it that way, but either way, well, okay, let me develop this point and give you more examples. The core idea, before I give you examples, I want to give you the core idea. The core idea here is that in order for an item of prohibited work on Shabbat to kick in a liability for doing that work, it has to be done deliberately and intentionally. For the sake, listen carefully though, for the sake of that thing. So I'll give you one more example. There's a prohibition on Shabbat to dig a hole. Because it's kind of like plowing a field. Plowing is prohibited. So digging a hole in the ground, like plowing, is prohibited. But what if, here's the scenario, what if you dug a hole, but your intention was not to have a hole, your intention was you needed the dirt, right? Simple example. Let's say you go to your backyard, and it's a dirt backyard, let's say no grass, dirt backyard, and you need some earth, you need some dirt. Why do you need dirt? I don't know. Who knows? You need it to weigh something down, so you need dirt, right? You want to weigh something down, and you need the dirt. So you dig the hole, not for the hole, right? You're not digging it to create a hole. You're digging out the earth for the earth. Yeah? You're not liable. You dug a hole, you're not liable on Shabbat. Why? Because it wasn't melechet machshevet. It wasn't deliberate and it wasn't intentional for that thing. Now, of course, you deliberately dug a hole, but you didn't dig it for the hole. You dug it for the earth. And that's something else. Are you with me in the distinction? Yes? Halacha says, and it's all based on verses, on scriptural verses. Halacha says very clearly that malacha, that work on Shabbat, in order to be considered liable, it has to be intentional. Not only intentional, it has to be deliberate. There's really two different elements, intentional and deliberate. In the case of digging a hole, it was intentional, but it wasn't deliberate. In other words, you weren't deliberately digging a hole, you were deliberately getting earth, and that's a different thing. So in that case, you are not liable. So, here's the kicker. I wonder if anyone yet put this together with the Makoshe story. And to help you get there on your own, I want to ask you a leading question. Are you ready? Here's my question that's going to lead you to the promised land on this idea. What was the intention of the Makoshesh? What was the intention of the wood gatherer? Think about the question. Think about it. What was the intention of the wood gatherer? Was he intending to gather wood, or was he intending for something else? What was his intention? Please unmute yourself. What was?
It's Sarah Carter.
Yes, Sarah. Hey.
Yeah, I think his intention was to let the Jewish people know they still had to perform the mitzvah.
Correct. He did not intend on gathering the wood. He did not want the wood. He didn't want the wood.
They shouldn't have killed him then.
Correct. We're getting there. Hold on. I told you I'm gonna drop the bomb of all bomb questions on this. I told you I was gonna drop a bomb. That just went off. It just let me reset it. Let me make sure everyone's with me on this, because I don't want you to miss it. In the laws of Shabbat, the laws stipulate that the only time you're liable for a prohibited act of work is if you intended to do that work, and you wanted to do that work, and that was your deliberate action. If you do an act of work, but you didn't intend it, you don't want it, you wanted something else, you're not biblically liable. Rabbinically, they say don't do it either way. Even if you want the dirt, don't dig the hole. Rabbinically. But that's not capital punishment liable, right? It's a rabbinic prohibition. The rabbinic prohibition came way after the Makoshesh, right? We're in biblical times. This story is biblical times, baby. This is not rabbinic times later. So 1 second. Let's understand this. If you're gathering wood on Shabbat, yeah? So we said, gathering wood, no. It's a no on Shabbat. Okay. All right. Fine. But this guy wasn't gathering wood. He was making a point. He wasn't in it for the wood. He didn't care about the wood. It's not like, oh man, I need all this wood. Let me go gather it. That wasn't his intention. His intention was to teach a lesson. Which means that, it's not even paradoxically, which means that in the ultimate scheme of things, it was not meleches machsheves. It wasn't the deliberate act of malacha, of work on Shabbat. Why was he found guilty? Guilty of what? He didn't do malacha. You with me on this? He didn't do the work of gathering the wood. That wasn't his intention. Now you're going to tell me, well, he did it. He didn't. Intention is important here. What happens to intention? It seems like it is an absolute and complete unjust ruling. And don't forget, the Makoshish was hauled off to Moses and Aaron and the people. And we didn't have the reading, but you can open up your favorite edition of the Torah, of the Chumash, a Bible, and you can see what happens. God says, such and such death penalty should be applied. Moses signs off on it. God signs off on it, and we're left wondering. This seems to be a miscarriage of justice, complete from end to end, a miscarriage of justice. Why? Here you have a guy who gathered wood, did not intend to gather wood. It wasn't about the wood. It was never about the wood. And they punished him. What's going on here? Miscarriage of justice. Sanctioned by Moses and God himself. Ribono shel olam, God Almighty, how does this happen? Okay. You ready? You ready for the answer? Okay. This Makoshesh, this wood gatherer, was obviously observed by 2 witnesses. We know this because he was ultimately applied the death penalty, which is only if there are 2 witnesses. So there were 2 witnesses. Now the witnesses will usually say the following to a person, back in the day when this court system was working, with regard to anything. They would say, sir, yeah, mister, do you know that this is prohibited? Yes, I do know it's prohibited. Do you know what the punishment for this is? Yes, I know what the punishment is. Now, that's called hasra. There's edim and hasra. You need witnesses, but also you need warning. And the warning is to check in with this person if they knew what they were doing. Because otherwise, you don't apply the death penalty. Otherwise, if you're not sure if they knew what they were doing, so here's what happened. These witnesses went to this dude, and they said, hey buddy, do you know it's Shabbat? Yeah. Do you know you're not allowed to gather wood on Shabbat? Yeah. Do you know what the punishment for that is? Well, I guess no one really. Well, they knew that it was some sort of capital punishment. They didn't know exactly which one. But generally speaking, do you know how severe it is? Yeah. They witnessed him doing it. He was gathering the wood. They brought him to Moshe. The rest is history. And right now, I just answered the question. Now, you might not have caught it, but I answered the question. You see, this guy was so sold on his story and on his lesson that when they checked in with him and asked him what he's doing, or do you know what you're doing? He went with his story. That what was he doing? What was his story? Help me out here. What was his story? What was he doing? Gathering wood. Gathering the wood. Now, we know because we know. How do we know? I don't know how we know, but we know because we know, right? That this guy had other intentions in mind. But as he faced those witnesses, and as he faced Moses, and as he faced justice, you know what he said he was doing? He was gathering wood. And gathering wood is problematic. So how could God allow it? But God knew his intention. Now the question's on God, right? Let's say the courts didn't know. Let's say he fooled everybody. Because he was really, well, excuse the pun, dead set on proving his point. Right? He was all in on bringing this point out. Fine. So he didn't break. He didn't say, oh, by the way, I was really doing it to prove a point. Because the moment he said that, then, oh, come on. You didn't gather wood. You're out. Like, what are you doing? Get out of here. You're fine. Or not fine. Like, don't do that again. But like a slap on the wrist, you're fine. But he never broke. He didn't break. He said, I'm gathering wood. But what about God? What about God? So here's the big idea. God set up a system of human courts. And God established a system of human courts that the judges should judge based on their understanding. This was a case where they consulted with God on the punishment, but not in the process. In other words, the question was, which form of death penalty? Right? And God answered that. The question before God was not, is he guilty or is he not guilty? God was not going to intervene in the court system and say, I know the truth, what the intention was. No. If the guy would have said what his intention was, that's one thing. But for God to step in, God wasn't going to step in. Now, what this means is something powerful. The human courts apply the law based on what? Based on possible intention or based on what they see on the ground? That's the question that I'm asking you right now. How do the courts rule? Based on possibly he was thinking, it was a plan, it was a plot, it was a scheme, it was a ruse? Possibility, giving this person the best, giving them the best of intentions, granting them that benefit of the doubt? Or does the court rule based on the facts in front of them? The answer is the latter. The courts rule based on the facts in front of them. I want to share with you my screen once more. Take a look at this text. This is text number 6. Okay, well, this is going back a little bit, but it's good. We need to read this anyway. This is what the Berditchever says. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. Inasmuch as he had no need for the wood, and he did not gather it to lay it in a supply, his only intent was to glorify God through his action. His work was not for its inherent purpose, and he did not technically transgress Shabbat. So again, this was going back before. This is clearly Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, the great Hasidic master, who says this guy didn't technically violate Shabbat. So why was he killed? Why was he executed? So we just explained, because the court didn't know. But God knew. God doesn't jump in because the court is obligated to adjudicate based on the facts on the ground and what they can observe and see and what they're told, not based on what they can sniff out intentions that are possible. We'll take a look at this. According to the Torah of truth, this is how the Rebbe explains it. According to Torah Emet, Torah of truth, the court's punishment of stoning is only for the action of the sin. Inasmuch as his action was a violation of the Shabbat, an earthly court must regard it as a deed that entails capital punishment. His intent is completely irrelevant. Now I have to say, that line, take it in context, doesn't mean that a person's intent is always completely irrelevant. If a person didn't know what they were doing, or intended to pick grapes and instead picked dates, it is relevant. We read that before. Maimonides, Halakha tells us that intent is relevant, but that's when it's clear intent. That's when it's observable intent. That's when you know what the intent is, or the person tells you, oh, I made a mistake. I wanted to do this, and instead I did that. But when every indication on the ground is that this was their intent, and it's a hidden intent that is contrary, then there's no way we can adjudicate based on hidden intent. That ceases to be a thing. There's no such thing as hidden intent, which is why the Rebbe explains elsewhere. This is why Courts don't absolve people on the basis of teshuvah. When a person repents to God, when a person feels very bad and remorseful, I feel so bad that I stole $1 million or I stole the Mona Lisa. I feel terrible. Yeah, I feel so bad. I'm doing teshuvah in my heart to God. Does the court still punish you? Yeah, because that's between you and God. But the court, that's your intention or your kavana, your spiritual stuff. But on the ground, there's still a violation that needs to be dealt with. Take a look at this text number 8. The very fact that the Torah authorizes an earthly court who cannot know the inner secret of a sinner's heart to administer punishment proves that the punishment is directed at the visible external dimension of the sinner that is not impacted by repentance of the heart. A sin impacts the sinner internally and externally. Repentance only rectifies the sin's internal impact on the sinner, not its external impact. The very fact that another can be ignorant of the sinner's repentance proves that repentance does not rectify the sin's external impact. A physical punishment is therefore necessary to rectify the sin's external impact. The Rebbe says something super powerful and very cutting and very real. A person makes a mistake and negative consequences result. Then the person feels really bad. Great. They feel bad. They're never going to do it again. And they make up with God. Wonderful. Did something bad happen? Yes or no? So on one level, on the most external level, something bad still happened objectively. And on that very external level, that cannot be undone. Therefore, there is a consequence. There needs to be a consequence in the earthly courts. On the ground, in dealing in the world of externalities, there needs to be a repercussion, a consequence for the externality of the action that was done. The intention, the inner harm can be fixed by inner work, but the outer damage needs to be rectified by outer action, which is where the courts come in. In the case of the Mekoshesh, no one knew his inner intent. No one knew that he wanted to prove a point. Everyone believed that he was gathering wood. He said so. He said as much. If at any point he said that my intention was not to gather wood, but simply to prove a point, they would have sent him home. But he didn't say that. And the court needs to work based on what it sees and based on what was done, and not presume positive intent and not presume something on the inside, this, that, or the other, and therefore let him off the hook. That's not how this works. So, we're not done yet. We have a major idea that's coming up. Hold on one second, Ben. Let me just wrap it up, and then I'm going to take a question. Then we're going to get to the real big idea. So, just to explain, so that there are no loose ends so far. We've answered now, I think, most of the questions. Number one, why did the people think that they were off the hook from mitzvot? Because they were banished, essentially. Okay, that was the easy. Sin, to prove a point. You know what the answer is? He didn't sin. He didn't sin. We asked before, why did this guy violate Shabbat? Right? Why did he violate Shabbat? To prove a point. From a sin, you're going to get a lesson. He didn't sin. The sin is if you intend it. He never intended it. It's not a sin. It's not violating Shabbat. Next question. Why did he do something with the capital punishment? It wasn't about the capital punishment. It was about Shabbat. Because Shabbat is the only law, the only prohibition where your intention makes a difference. So here he broke a law without breaking the law. Are you with me? Are you with me in the Mekoshesh? The Mekoshesh never ended up breaking the law, and he still made his point. That's the double whammy. He never broke the law because he didn't intend to gather the wood. So it turns out he never sinned, and yet he was executed for sinning, which proved his point. Not that there's miscarriage of justice, but that our actions matter, because in the world of action, it looked like that's what he did, and that's what happened. Are you with me on the multiple levels on how this thing worked? That's why he chose Shabbat. Not because of the capital degree, but because intention is king. Intention is the key. Oh, the paradox is, intention is what matters, but the court will go based on action. That's like the double. I hope that's not throwing anybody for a loop. Like Meleches Machsheves, you have to have intention, but when the court adjudicates, they can only go based on what they see and what they know. There's no way to know beyond that. The true intention. Just to make sure we're not double reversing that point. Now, the final dagger. What's the connection, the deeper connection between this story and the story of the spies? This will blow you away. We need to understand the story of the spies. I'm going to give you the 30-second Hasidic take. Why did the spies come back with an evil report about the land? And why were they punished for 40 years of wandering? Let me tell you the deeper story. The spies were afraid. The spies were afraid of Israel, not of the enemy. They were afraid of themselves. And they were afraid that encountering a physical land, which would require them to start doing physical work, becoming farmers and merchants and business people and all that stuff, they thought they would be spiritually doomed. They wanted to stay in the oasis, the spiritual oasis, the cocoon of the midbar, of the desert, where they could just study Torah all day and meditate and levitate and eat manna, mitzvot that they can't do in the desert. They had all these mitzvot, but they didn't want the mitzvot. They didn't want those mitzvot. They said, forget those. Let's stay and let's meditate. Let's stay and meditate on God, and let's stay and pray to God. Let's stay in the desert and not deal with that. In other words, in the battle between intention and action, in the battle between kavana and maisa, intention and action, they said intention is more valuable. Let's stay in the realm of intention. Let's stay in the realm of thought and study and meditation and prayer. Let's stay here in the desert and not go here hands-on in Israel. Does that point make sense? Yes? They didn't want to go in and get their hands dirty. They didn't want to start doing the work and doing the mitzvot. They wanted to stay here in theory, in intention. And so, the people thought, as a result of the decree of 40 years, they thought the wish was granted. They thought that God was saying, okay, 40 years now, you don't have to act. You don't have to get your hands dirty. You don't have to work the earth. You don't have to do those mitzvot. Just study and pray and meditate and keep it in your head. The Makoshe says we have to debunk this myth. The intention is not where it's at. The action is where it's at. And to prove it, I'm going to do something where my intention is good, but my actions are not. And you'll see how the court rules based on not intention, but on action. And that will prove once and for all. Then the debate in the tug of war, in the epic cage match between intention and action, action triumphs. Action supersedes intention. And so the Makoshesh did something. He gathered wood. In action, he gathered the wood. In intention, he was proving a point. The court ruled based on action, not intention. And with that, he debunked the story of the spies altogether. Because the spies would have had you believe, and the people actually fell for it, that God cares only about your intention. And the Makoshesh taught us that God cares about primarily our actions. This is a constant struggle in life. Let me bring it home. Constant struggle in life between intentions and actions. We have all these good intentions. And the question is that good enough? People say it's the thought that counts. But is it really? Is it really the thought that counts? Yeah? As long as you feel, people say, I don't need to do that mitzvah. I love God in my heart, right? It's like a cardiac Jew. Yeah, I love God in my heart. It's good. Like my heart is good. Okay, intention is good. Intention, I mean emotion also. We'll put heart with the mind also. For these purposes, we'll lump them together. Kavana, intention is great. You need it also, by the way. It's important to have that intention and emotion. But what's the ikr? What's the primary? It's action. Hamaisa hu ha'ikr. The primary thing is action. Why? Because we live in a world of action. So it's great. If you love somebody, it's great that you know you love them. You know what's even better? To tell them that you love them. To show them that you love them. To do something for them that demonstrates that you love them. So, Shalom, come here for a second. Come. Hey, Shalom. How's it going? This is me putting him on the spot. By the way, Shalom has been listening to this class the whole time. I'm going to check in later to see if he got the class, right? But here's the deal. I love Shalom. But it's one thing that I love him. That's good. It's a good start. But it's even better if I do things that demonstrate that I love him. Shalom, I love you. And because I love you, I'm going to give you my LaCroix, pamplemousse, for you to enjoy. See that? That's true love. Sharing the LaCroix, that's like next level stuff right there. That's like fresh, bubbly goodness. That's seltzer. Listen, intention is great, but we live in a world of action. The spies wanted to stay in intention. They didn't want to get their hands dirty in Israel. And as a result, they stayed in the desert. They didn't get their hands dirty. And the people thought maybe the spies won. Maybe the spies are right. Maybe God values intention, not action. The Makoshe says, I am not going to let this stand one more minute. I'm not going to let this fallacy go on for not one more minute. I'm going to gather wood with the intention to prove a point, not to gather wood, right? But the action is gathering wood, and watch, I'm going to face the ultimate punishment because of my actions, which will prove once and for all that God measures, the courts measure by our actions, not our intentions, and our actions are what matter. So, if somebody, imagine this. You're sitting at home at night. Not you, but the royal you, or that's not a thing, but the general you. You're sitting at home at night, and out of nowhere, someone crashes through your front door or your front window, bursts in your home. You are shocked beyond belief. And you tell, what are you doing in my house? Or maybe you're afraid, and they say, I thought I heard screaming from inside your house. I thought someone was in danger. So I came in. They just busted your door and window. Yeah? But they had good intentions. At least they claimed they had good intentions. Yeah? So are you going to go after them to repair the door or window? You live in a world of action, yeah? How much do you trust them for their intent? Right? Maybe they saw your pit bull or your dog next to you and they changed your tune and they said, no, we had good intentions. We were only trying to help. Yeah? How much do you operate on intention, and how much do you operate in this world based on action? You and I, right? Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. Actions, that's why I didn't just tell Shalom I loved him. I gave him my seltzer. Because talk is cheap, my friends. And intention is, oh, look at this. He loves me also. Oh, see that? That's called reciprocal love right there. I got my seltzer back. You're not getting my Bud Light, though, for many reasons. Getting back to this point. That was a commercial. Getting back to this point. We live in a world of action. Intention is great, but you and I judge based on action. The world is impacted based on action. You got to pay if you break my window. It doesn't matter what you were thinking. I just need a new window, so please pay for it. Right? That's the world we live in. Same thing is true with our spiritual connection. God gave us a wonderful Torah, and we need to study Torah. And you know why? Studying Torah helps us know what to do. Gadol Torah, Talmud shemevi l'yei ma'aseh. The Talmud says, you know what? Why study is great? Study is amazing. Torah study is the greatest because it leads to action. But it's all about translating into deeds. So, the takeaway from tonight is, number one, gather your wood before Shabbos. Number two, second takeaway. It's a practical. Second takeaway. See, practical takeaways are good though. In a class that's all about action, it's also good to have a practical takeaway. But the big idea that I wanted to share with you is always translate your good intentions into actions. Whether it's helping someone, whether it's standing up for someone, whether it's a mitzvah, be excited about it, feel it, think it, and then, as Nike once said, just do it. And that's the way we roll. It's all about action. Action makes a difference. Let's light up this world. Let's make this world a better place using our gift of action. Thank you very much for joining me tonight as we decoded the very mysterious case of the Makoshesh. And I hope we made sense of it. I think, hopefully, we made sense of a story, very enigmatic, very not well known, and I hope you walked away with some practical lessons as well. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am available now to stay on for questions. Thank you, Fred. I know some of you had questions. I felt like I wanted to run through to make sure that we got it semi on time. I'm here to answer questions. I want to give you a heads up. The event that we were going to have Thursday at 6:30, I mentioned to some of you, is going to be next Thursday at 6:30. It's called Healing the Divide. Individuals African American leaders, Jewish leaders that were instrumental in helping heal Crown Heights after the riots in 1991 will be speaking live. Multiple leaders in various groups will be speaking about healing the divide next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. That's one thing. Also, this Sunday. This Sunday is actually next Thursday, 6:30 p.m. We may need to change that, so hold on. Don't quote me on that. I'm just realizing we may have another conflict. But all right. Otherwise, Sunday we're having a special day of learning and inspiration in honor of preparation of the third day of Tammuz, the Rebbe's 26th yahrzeit, which is coming up next week. So this Sunday in the morning we're going to have multiple classes about the Rebbe's teachings, and in the evening we'll have Rabbi Manis Friedman, a great scholar and a great Chabad thinker and philosopher, who will be speaking about the life and legacy of the Rebbe. All of this will be on Zoom. There'll be one link for the whole day, classes on the hour. You can tune in at any point to whichever classes you want. And then in the evening, we're going to show a film, documentary film, about the Rebbe's life and legacy. And then Rabbi Friedman will give a talk. And then we'll have a little bit of a farbrengen. And then our evening will be closed out. So that's it. That's all the news that's fit to print for right now. Great to see you. And if you need to go, Laila Tov. If you want to stay and chat or ask questions, I'm here as well. All right, go ahead. Chazim, go ahead. Wait, yeah, unmute yourself.
Okay, so 2 points. Number one, I think it was last week or the week before, we studied about why the Rabbi Shalom forgave King David, and it was because he did tshuva. And with all the sins that he committed, he was repentant, and the whole point of it was that if you're truly repentant, then God knows that it's in your heart, and then you're forgiven.
Right.
Okay? So God had to know that this Mekoshesh, whatever his name is, was truly trying to do something right, and yet he allowed, because it says, Kidvar B'Shem Hashem Kidvar Moshe, or something like that, right? Then, so King David's forgiven for all the horrible sins that he committed, and because he was truly repentant, and because his intention, even though he knew he was doing wrong at the time, he repented for it. Now, I'm not saying the Mekoshesh repented, but it doesn't seem to me like he did that horrible a thing. And he was actually trying to remind the children of Israel their obligation. The second item is that to my knowledge, the only other time there's this kind of an action is in Emor. And it has to do with Ham Kalel, the cursor, the person that curses his parents, right? And it says all of it, all of it leads to ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, and it also ends in the exact same way. Let's see. Ka'asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. Both those instances of someone being killed by the community end up exactly the same way. Ka'asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. And it seems to me like this was a totally unjust, unnecessary action. Just to prove that there's a court of law, and we follow the court of law, not necessarily God's decision. So the whole thing was set in motion, so there will be justice. Tzedek tirdof, right? And this is not an example of tzedek tirdof.
I hear you.
I understand the lesson. Okay?
I'm with you.
I appreciate it. Okay, I appreciate it greatly, but it's no excuse for the action that took place, as far as I'm concerned.
I hear you. Excellent question. So I'll say this. First of all, the question is a good question. It's not unlike the question that I asked in the class, which is, how could God allow this to happen? The distinction that I would draw between the story of King David and the story of the Mekoshesh is the following. When it came to King David, we don't find, at least to my knowledge, that the rules of the punishment, the protocol was the same. The Eidim, the Hasra, the witnesses, the warning, with the story of Bathsheba, I don't know that we have that same degree of process, right? Of judicial process in the lead-in to get to that state where it goes to an earthly court. In other words, in that case, it was completely in the hands of God's justice, and God says, you have to deal with me, and King David says, I'm going to deal with you, and he repented the tshuva for the rest of his life. This was a different story. This Mekoshesh designed it specifically to be adjudicated in a court of human law. In other words, on the ground. So King David
planned this. This was premeditated. Okay.
King David's case could not. King David could not have gone. 1 second. King David could not have gone to a bet din because there were no witnesses and there was no warning. So the whole thing can't go to a. So it can't go to. I
get that. Yeah.
So in this case, the guy set it up. So God has to handle that, and he did shuva on that, and King David. And at the end of the day, King David is not known. The reason why King David is not because of the good stuff that he did, but it's because of the tshuva, and he lived the rest of his life in regret and remorse.
Yeah, so I understand that.
Now, on the flip side, this guy, the Mekoshesh, he deliberately sets it up to follow the protocol, to end up in a human court, to be adjudicated not by God, but by human beings. When the human beings come to God, God's not going to tell them how to judge because this is given over to human courts. God doesn't get involved on that level. So God says, look, you want to know what the punishment is? Skila, stoning. That's what the punishment is. How you apply it, I already gave that to you. And the court has to go by what it did. Now, the question really, to me, the question is, look, the guy got exactly what he wanted. So now the question comes back to what you said before. How are you suicidal? How is a person allowed to do this?
It's wrong.
Right? It seems wrong. Okay, his calculus was that he needs to prove the point that action matters, and a lack of believing that action matters. Maybe he thought we can pause it. Maybe he thought that itself is pikuach nefesh. If the people don't take action seriously, then they're headed off a cliff altogether. So maybe he felt like he was the one that has to step in as the nachshain, as the guy who walks into the water up to his nose or even past his nose, because he has to put a stop to this.
You think he wanted to be a hero?
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, everything that I've said thus far is what it says in the books. I feel hesitant to speculate, so I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a strange story. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It still rubs you the little, not you, me also, a little bit. It feels a little uncomfortable because of how it all went down. But that's
instead of
the
mulligan.
Yeah.
Instead of a mulligan, he should have asked for a mulligstein, and then maybe he would have been exonerated.
There you go. Good. Any other questions or comments? No? Good. Listen, everybody have a wonderful night. It's good to see you. It's good to study Torah together, and looking forward to the next opportunity very soon. Tomorrow at noon, Daily Parsha. Tomorrow night, Tanya Think Different. We got much more stuff. All right. See you, everybody. Good night. Stay healthy. Bye, everyone. See you all. Pleasure. Bye.
Shouldn't Hashem step in so he doesn't die? Didn't he want to survive?
That's what Ben asked. Clearly, God allowed the course to fail. Do you understand the class? Nice. What do you think? A little graphic. A little scared.
This is from a really good.
Ooh. Who's the